Thanks for coming, everybody. And I've got with me Jason Reynolds, who was here. Well, you're originally from. You're from here, right?
From here, yeah.
Yeah. So, but he was here for Novatine, which have any of you gone to Novatine? Yeah, that'll be in March. Here, March 5th. Thank you. I should know.
I'm going to be here again.
I'm going to be nice. All right.
Which is
cool.
good.
Yeah. So that's where I first met Jason, and I said, we got to get you back for the Shut Up and Write panel. So that's what we're doing tonight, and we're going to talk about a lot of things. One of the things that when I met Jason and we were sitting down at that restaurant or whatever talking, one of the things that really struck me is he was talking about outreach and working with kids at the juvenile detention center. So I want to talk about that, but before we get into all of that, first thing I want to ask you is, what was your path to becoming a writer? What was, how did that, was it a plan? Did you fall into it? Right.
I feel now, at this particular phase in the game, I know for a fact that it was never sort of in the cards for me, which is weird because it was obviously in the cards for me at this point, right? It's like at this point, you're sort of like, oh, it was in the cards, but looking back at my life, I don't necessarily think that it was, at least not this way. Not as a novelist or writing prose or writing books. I don't know if I ever saw that. I didn't read any novels. I was telling actually some young people today, I didn't read any novels until I was 17 years old. No books.
Why was that?
Because I grew up in the 80s and the early 90s, and I grew up, the community that I came up in was very particular, only particular outside of itself, but everybody in the community was all very normal. I grew up at a time where, my family, my cousins were knuckleheads, and my brother was a knucklehead, and my dad was gone, and the neighborhood that I grew up in Oxon Hill, it was just, I didn't see Oxon Hill in any books. Right, so it was funny. Is I would grow up, and the way that I was living in Oxon Hill and around sort of Anacostia area, and this back and forth, and Wheeler Road, and that whole area, they didn't exist. So I going to school and sort of reading To Kill a Mockingbird, it was strange for me, and it's like there are no Atticus Finches in my neighborhood. Right.
So would you say then that it felt to you at that time in that place that books were kind of irrelevant?
For me.
Right, no, that's what I'm asking.
Books were terribly relevant for everybody else.
Perception at the time.
Right? And my perception at the time, from 1980 to 1999, you had Walter Dean Myers solely, right? Writing for kids who were growing up like me. So to learn Toni Morrison was an incredible thing, except Toni Morrison, she wasn't writing contemporary work. And even most of Walter's work was based in the 70s, besides Scorpion and then, of course, later on Monster. But there was nothing there. We had music, we had movies. Right? And so the music was the thing that sort of saved me. The music, hip-hop, everybody wagged their fingers at our generation and said that hip-hop was going to kill us when it was literally saving a lot of our lives. Because they were our story, they were our orators, they were our raconteurs, they were telling our stories, and they were telling them honestly, and the whole world could hear them. And that's what it was for me, right?
So
hearing them.
When you said earlier, you didn't really envision yourself becoming a writer in this sort of writing books novelist. So did you envision yourself becoming a writer of writing hip hop lyrics, writing word poetry?
That was it for me. I wanted to. Queen Latifah was like the impetus of my whole thing, because I was reading her rap lyrics, and that's when I sort of realized, oh well, Queen Latifah and Langston Hughes are sort of doing the same thing. I mean, sort of not, but sort of they are, right? And it's different, except Queen Latifah is putting it in contemporary speak, and it's a different sort of cadence, and it's a little bit, it's a little more sort of groovy, so to speak. And so I'm gonna do what she's doing, and I started to write poetry. And I started to write poetry not only because of hip hop, but once I got in there, then I started to sort of let's see what Langston Hughes is really doing, right? Let me really kind of get into this Langston Hughes thing. Let me really kind of later on, let me get into some of this, Amiri Baraka or this Emily Dickinson and all these other sort of people that were all doing very similar. I mean, County Cullen was a rapper in the 1920s, except he wasn't a rapper, right? But he was really strict rhyme scheme and that was it for me. And I figured, look, I can just do this forever and ever and ever, and I dedicated my life to poetry. Never, but I wouldn't read anything. I never, no one could have told me. I told my friends and my mentors and people, my professors, that I would never write fiction. ever write a novel.
What changed?
Walter D. Myers. I was 25. 25, and I lost everything, and I had HarperCollins published a book of poetry when I was 21, and the book didn't sell. I mean, that whole thing went on, and I was like, man, I think I'm going to quit. No more writing for me. And then I got a phone call from Chris Myers, a dear friend of mine, Walter's son, and he said, Jay, I haven't seen you. Let's go to the beach. I said, all right. So we go to the beach, and Chris was like, hey, listen, man, what are you working on? And I said, I'm not working on anything. I quit. I'm done. No more writing. I'm done. I feel lucky to have had one book published. Not everybody can say that. I'm good to go. And he was like, well, look, my father is, at the time, Walter had just turned 72, I think. My dad is, he's in the 70s, he's getting older, and when he goes, somebody's going to have to write this work. And I'm like, well, I'm thinking to myself, you should probably do it. You're a writer, right? Like, you're a son, And he's like, I think it's going to be you. I think you should do it. And I was like,
there's no pressure, right?
Right, it's like, and I'm like, he's like, I think you should do. I'll never forget this. And he's like, I think you should do it. And I said, well, I don't even know how to do this. And he said, well, look, I think you should go back, read some of my dad's old work, and see if anything jars loose. I said, okay. So I went and I read, because I have so much respect for Chris, I was like, man, I'll follow through with the experiment. And I went and I dug up a copy of The Young Landlords. And I read The Young Landlords, and it chemically changed me. And the reason why, and what it really was it gave me permission. It said, oh, all this time you've been trying to be Harper Lee, and you've been trying to be Toni Morrison. And the truth is that your natural voice is just as valuable. Yeah. Walter was writing really tight work in a very loose style, and that's really, really sophisticated and really hard to do, though everybody underestimates how sophisticated that is. And so I sat down and decided to write When I Was the Greatest, and it took me 6 weeks. Because it could be me just being me. Yeah. And it turned out Chris was right, and that was that. And Walter, then I met Walter, of course, and Walter, he sort of put his hand on my head,
Give you some blessings.
Yeah, he's like, he literally said, I only met him one time, and he literally said to me, he said, what's your writing schedule? I said, I write 2.5 hours in the morning. No, I said, I write 2.5 pages in the morning, 2.5 pages at night. And he said, okay. I said, I do a very similar thing, about 5 pages a day. I said, yeah, 5 pages a day. He said, okay, well, I read your work, I read your manuscript, you read it When I Was the Greatest. And he said, if that's your schedule and you stick to that schedule, that's 5 pages a day, that's 25 pages a week. If you work 5 days a week, that's a book every 6.5 to 8 weeks. He said, if you do it that way, I promise you, you will not fail. And then he walked away, and that was
Bam.
And that was that. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. I think it's really interesting. I want to circle back a little bit to what you were saying about after you read Walter's work, you were able to finally give yourself permission to write in your own voice as opposed to some other voice put upon you.
Right.
And I was just I just got back from Pittsburgh this morning, and I went to college in Pittsburgh, and I was like sitting in one of my professor's classes, and all these young people are in there, right? And they're all desperately trying to be like somebody else. And it's so interesting that so often the thing that makes you you, the thing that makes you special, for whatever reason, it's the last thing that occurs to you to do, right? So, how do we communicate that? How do we? Is it a matter of confidence?
I teach an MFA course up in Cambridge, and so I deal with the same thing every year.
Right.
My students are always like, oh, most of my critique is, this isn't you though. Mm-hmm. You're not on the page at all, right? This is all very technically sound, and it sounds beautiful. The sentence structure is incredible, and I'm bored to death. Mm-hmm. Right? And the reason why I'm bored is because you don't exist in the work. Right? You're nowhere in it. And I think the one thing that I've been pushing for my students and for myself and when it comes to writing is you spend an entire life learning how to write. And in order for you to actually write anything good, you basically have to spend the same amount of time unlearning how to do all those things. And I think for me, it's been the unlearning process, figuring out how to allow myself to break all the rules, right? You learn the rules only so you can break them.
Right.
Anyone who follows the rules strictly in writing fiction has written a textbook, right? It's like I don't want to read. No one wants to read that, right? I want to read the thing that breaks the rules, the thing that bends them. This is a creative art form. And I think we writers are so serious and we take our work so seriously, and it's like writing is like this upper tier thing. It's all very elite and like all this kind of like, hoity-toity. And it's like, at the end of the day, I want to read the work from the person who is a creative artist, who can write work that is creative. I was reading some Joan Didion stuff this morning, and I'm thinking to myself, man, she understood that. She understood how to sort of manipulate language in a way, break sentence structure, write in fragments. All our lives, they slap us on the wrist and say, you gotta write complete sentences. And the truth is that sometimes fragmented sentences are more powerful.
And they make sense
and they make sense in that. The human brain doesn't work in complete sentences. Right? There's this famous, a buddy of mine in New York, and this is an interesting sort of way to think about this, but a friend of mine in New York, he does all the, he hand paints all the old New York signs, right? So if you go to New York and you see these restaurants that have hand-painted signs, it's one guy in New York who does all of them. Because it's an old art, it's a lost art. No one's doing sort of like gold flake and all that kind of stuff, except this one guy. And so I'm talking to him, and he's like, it's so funny, people go to the Balthazar restaurant and they look at this beautiful sign and they say, man, I can't believe it's hand-painted, it looks perfect. And he said, and I always tell them, if you get really close to it and you really look at it, you'll see all the imperfections and all the flaws and all the squiggles and all the things and the mistakes that I made. He said, but the beauty is that the human mind recognizes that the human hand, the imperfect human hand, as perfect. Right? And the same goes for literature and for language. The human brain recognizes the imperfect voice, the imperfect sentence, the way the brain is working, it recognizes that as perfection. Right?
Well, I mean, true perfection is kind of the death of art, really.
Or as comfort, as familiar.
Right?
It recognizes it as familiar. True perfection, right? Like,
it's creepy.
It's creepy. And awkward, right? It is. Yeah. It's Stepford, right? It's all awkward and like, and so I try to approach, I worked in retail for years and years and years and years and years before this, and we talk about textiles and fabrics, they say, this was made with a loose hand, right? So if your t-shirt, if your sweater is really loose and flowy, they say that the knit is a loose hand, and I sort of approach my literature with a loose hand.
Cool. So all right, so then you read Walter D. Myers and you say, you know what, I can do this.
I can do it. Well, sort of. I'm gonna try.
Right.
I can attempt.
Right. But I think that there is some part of anyone who sets out to write a book. There's a bit of arrogance in there.
Oh, right? We're the most narcissistic.
I mean, there's a bit of kind of like.
For sure.
Even if you at the next moment go like, oh, but I suck. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be that kind of.
There it is.
Nugget, something there, right? So
you think you're right.
So then what happens, right? Then you sit down, you're like, I'm gonna write a book.
Do it.
And what
and
then how'd that go for you?
And so there's a gap. I got signed when I was 20 to Harper, into agent and all that craziness. Book comes out, does terribly, and then my agent won't take it.
Now, does terribly. What does that mean?
Well, so that book, I got a royalty statement, not a check. There were no checks, but I got a royalty statement recently because it's out of print now. But my last royalty statement, I think I still owe like 98%.
98%.
Yeah. The book sold like 10 copies.
Okay.
Maybe at max the book sold 100 copies max. Seriously, all but like being realistic, 100 copies max. On like a 15, 20,000 copy buy.
Right. And that's discouraging. Right? So
to say the least.
Right. So that's my question then. Like, how do you come back from that? How did you come back from that?
You know what? As far as I was concerned, I wasn't going to. I tried to write other work. I wrote a bunch of other follow-ups to that book, and my agent lost faith. My agent used to represent Aaron was still, I guess, still represents Aaron Magruder, who at the time was just getting famous for Boondocks. And so I was like way down here on the list. Like I would go visit her and she'd say, "Hey, Aaron's calling, can you step out of the room?" Like it was that kind of thing. Seriously, she was my agent for 3.5, 4 years, and I spoke to her maybe 3.5, 4 times.
Right.
And so I had to work up the courage to fire her.
Right.
And that happened. I was like, this isn't working out. I'm going to write something else and pitch it because I still have connections at HarperCollins. And I'm going to just pitch it cold myself. I'm going to represent myself and pitch it. So I wrote this book about Bermuda. So this is before the watching thing. I tried my hand one time at prose, and this was this time because I was desperate. I wrote this book about Bermuda, and it's such a terrible, terrible book that no one will ever see. It's in my mom's house, actually. She had like a manuscript of it. And I gave it to Harper. It took them 9 months to tell me no. And which was another devastation. Sure. And after that, I said, that's when Chris came, Walter came, and I wrote When I Was the Greatest. And then what happened is I called my old editor at Harper who had retired, but we were still very good friends, and she was sort of like a mentor to me. She taught me how to write story arc. When I was writing My Name is Jason Mine Too, which is poetry and art, she's the one who said, look kid, one day you're gonna go off on your own and do your thing and tell some stories, but you don't know how to write a story, because you've never been trained to do that. You are a poet, and this is your whole world is in 10 lines. And so she started teaching me story arc in a 3-year period of writing that book for Harper. And so I called her and said, look, I'm drowning, but I got this thing. It was all written on legal pad When I Was the Greatest, because I wrote it at work in a retail store, clothing store. And so I was like, I'm working on this thing, I'm putting it into my computer, but I feel like I got this thing, and I just want you to look at it, but I don't have an agent anymore, and I'm drowning. And she said, all right, well look, I've been waiting for you to call me. I have a friend who has an agency, and I think you guys would be a perfect fit. This is before, she never read the work. You know, she said, I'm gonna send an email, we'll see what happens. 2 weeks later, I'm with my new agent, and they read the work, When I Was the Greatest, and a month or 2 later, we did an edit or two, and it was sold. And there was this big like bidding war and all kind of madness, and so everything was sort of changing really quickly. Yeah. But there was like a 7-year gap of struggle and doubt and insecurity, and that insecurity it still exists. I mean, I'm still sort of terribly insecure and terribly afraid that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and it'll all be gone. And that it
well,
didn't.
I want to. So then, how did that book do?
When I Was the Greatest.
Yeah. How did that work? How did it go?
You know what? And here's the thing. When I Was the Greatest, it was a slow bubble, though. I mean, it did well, but it took a while.
Did you feel like it always was going to do well? Like, did you or
no?
Did you know? There was no indication. Right?
I couldn't even believe that they were publishing. I remember I was in Target when they called me. My agent called me. Well, first I was in Vegas. My agent called me and said, "Hey, there's a bidding war." Then I was back in Vegas, and my agent called me, and I'm in Target, and she's like, "Hey, this is what's happening."
Let me stop. For those who don't know, when they say a bidding war, what that means in publishing is that the agent sends out the manuscript to a bunch of editors at once at various publishing houses. And oftentimes what will happen is that a couple of editors will get back to the agent and be like, ooh, I want this one. And if you have a good agent, he or she, my agent's a woman, so I just...
So smart. Yeah.
And so if they're a good agent, they don't immediately say, yes, sold to you, the first person who said they want to buy it. Instead they go, thank you, we'll take that under consideration. And then they wait for other offers to come in. You get enough offers, and then all of a sudden you've got an auction for that book, which drives the price of the advance payment up or any number. It gives you significantly more leverage as the author and agent into it. So it's a really good thing.
And so that was happening. I'm in Target, and I'm like, what? I'm like walking through Target, and I'm kind of freaking out a little bit. But I'm also sort of like, in my mind, I'm like, are they really gonna pay for this? Right. Like, really, somebody's gonna pay me for this? And that's what I told when I told my agent after we sold it. I was like, God, I can't. I feel like I'm literally tricking everybody.
What a bunch of suckers!
I'm shooting from the hip. This whole thing is a big hoax. I'm shooting things, right? But I still. So when it came out, because it takes 2 years. This is the secret, right? Like they buy the book and then they say, all right, kid, now it's time to basically rewrite the whole thing and get it where it's ready to go. It's going to take you a 2-year period. And so now I'm editing, and I'm working with this big time editor, and she edits all my heroes, right? And she edits Lori Halls Anderson, and she edits not Jackie Wilson. She edits Sharon Draper, and and all these people, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be intense, and it is very intense. And she's like, this is good, this is not so good, work on this, try this. I'm doing my thing. And then the book comes out, and I go to the Barnes & Noble, and it's the coldest, I'll never forget, it was the coldest day of the year. And New York City is a ghost town, which never happens, obviously. Ghost town, nobody in the street, nobody, and I go to Barnes & Noble, and it's just me in the store, and my agent. And she's there for the photo. They take the picture of me at the bookshelf with the book. And I stand there, and I still have it, and I'm pointing at the book, and I can't believe it's on the shelf. And then like this slow bubbling starts, right? And it's like, all right, you see people are like, oh, there's this guy, right? And there's the book with the gun, right? And that's sort of what happened. It became sort of like the book with the gun, which was okay for me as long as that meant you were reading it, which some people weren't. It was like, oh, we can't carry it because it's got a gun. Barnes & Noble said, hey, I'm not sure we can carry it because of the gun. And my agent, my editor's like, well, then don't carry it. And then they're like, oh, okay, we'll carry it. Right. But everyone was sort of afraid of the gun. And then it sort of started to bubble, and then the press started, and the conferences, and the festivals, and all that started. Okay. And then the whole time, and so this is at this point where we're talking about, so Walter's in the hospital. So, and nobody knows that but me. Because Chris is one of my best friends. So Walter's dying, and I'm the only person who knows that he's dying, besides from his family and his editor. And I'm traveling around, and they're talking about this new book, and they're saying, oh, this is sort of like the son of Walter D. This is the guy, right? They're doing that whole thing where it's like, here's the next Walter D. Myers, but they don't know that Walter is dying. And that I'm just trying to like, I'm not trying to teeth anything off this guy. I'm just literally trying to like, figure out how to trick everybody to let me into this industry, do my thing, right? And then after a while, it starts to bubble, it bubbles. Walter passes away, and then it really starts to bubble. Because then it's like, oh, wait a minute, it's almost like, hey, damage control, don't fret.
Right, there's a vote.
There's someone else here, and that's
we got it covered already.
And that's really what happened. Like it was like a strange timing thing where it's like, oh, now Walter's sort of slipping away, and just so you guys know, there's someone here to fill that void, which was so weird for me. It was like, that's weird. And then he passes away. It's like this motion, like ships passing in the night. And then I won the award, and then everything, of course. So then everything all of a sudden took me a lot more seriously.
Awards are funny like that.
Awards are funny like that.
So wins the award, and then but you were working on another book, right? How does how does the expectation then color the book after that?
Well, I mean, luckily for me, I didn't wait for the award. It didn't matter as much because by the time, so because of my insecurities and because of my fear and because of sort of my feeling that this was all going to be some strange dream that I was going to wake up from, I worked tirelessly and obsessively. So the 2-year period of getting that book signed to when I Was the Greatest hitting the bookshelf, I had written like 2 or 3 other books that they bought. So by the time When I Was the Greatest came out, I was already signed for 3 more books, right, that were already written. And so for me, it was like by the time Boy in the Black Suit came out, I wasn't even thinking about it anymore. Right. And it was already done. There was, of course, the, is it going to sophomore slump? Is it going to be a thing where, and the truth is, I don't know, because it just came out in January. Right. Like, it seems like it's been years and years, but it's only been almost 2 years, and there's just been so much work that's been sort of, pushed through. But there's 12, I wrote 11 books, man, in 3 years.
I can't even.
But that's because of fear. That's what fear will do.
Right. Well, it can, but fear can also stop you.
Oh, it can cripple you.
So how do you have any thoughts on how one takes? Like, fear can be a really useful thing. It can stop you, but it can also. So how do you turn it into the useful thing, right? Like, what sort of alchemy do you use there?
I don't know.
To make that happen. Oh, that's not working.
I don't know.
You can't tell me it's magic. That's not.
It's not. That's not. Definitely not magic. It's definitely not. You know what it is, man? It's mothers. For me, it's mothers. It's a mama. I got a mama, and she is 70, and she's working 40 hours a week. That's all it took for me. Like, I can't allow, for me, I'm a family guy. I've got siblings, I got mom, I've got like little brother and older brother and sisters and all this stuff. And so for me, and I'm the one, right? There's always the one guy in the family. It's like, look, he's gonna be the guy that's gonna have to make sure that the rest of this thing is moving. Right? My mom was that one for her generation, and I'm that one for mine. And so, every time I think about the fact that my mom is still working 40 hours a week, it just makes me want to work harder for two reasons. One, because she doesn't complain about working 40 hours a week at 70, so I shouldn't complain about working 40 hours a week at 31 years old. And two, she shouldn't have to work 40 hours a week anymore. Nice. And so if I can do all the work that I do is to sort of set up a life for myself and set up a literary lineage for young people to have something that they can bite down on. But it's also so that I can figure out how to generate an income with a gift that I feel like my mom really sort of poured into, and to get that money and give some to alleviate some of those bills and say, look, you don't have to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. You know, and that keeps me working. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to actually do that, but it's enough to motivate me to work as hard as I do. And the other thing is that I just don't want them to close the door. If they close the door, I can't feed my mom. Right? So it's like I told when they first signed me, I sat with my editor at a restaurant and I said, listen, I want to tell you something and I don't want you to take it the wrong way. And she said, okay. I said, number one, I come from a bloodline and I come from a tradition where we don't accept anything less than excellence. And it's not because I've always been excellent, but it's because I have a really, really high standard in terms of what I want to do for my life. I look at Walter and I'm like, oh, that dude is excellent. And if I'm not going to be him, and if I'm not going to sit in that tier, I'm not going to do it. Number two, I want you to know that if you give me an inch, if you crack the door for me, I'm going to kick the door off the hinges. You know, a famous Walt Whitman, I don't know, was it unlock the doors, and he says, take the doors off their jams, in Song of Myself, right? That it sticks with me all the time. Like, no, don't unlock the door. I'm not going to unlock the door. I'm not that nice of a guy. I'm going to kick the door off the jam. Right, the door won't be there anymore, and I want you to know that going into this thing that you're getting ready to get a barrage. This is going to be an onslaught because you're looking at a kid who's been hungry, and it won't stop, and it hasn't. And it, as far as I'm concerned, Walter was in it for 30 years and he wrote over 100 books. Jackie Wilson's been in it for 20 years and she's written 40 books. I'm aiming for them. Man.
It's interesting. I do a very similar thing, and some people, they have their heroes that they look up to, and they're like, I want that. I want to be like that guy, And some people find that very kind of daunting or depressing, and it kind of stops them. But I've always found it to be the opposite. That I'm basically I want to be the next Neil Gaiman. That's my plan.
Exactly.
That's totally my plan.
Me
Is it
too.
realistic? I don't know. Doesn't matter.
It's worth shooting for, right?
Right. Because if you only aim this high, of course that's as far as you're going to go. You're not going to go higher if you only aim here.
Exactly.
If you aim here, you may not go all the way up there, but I'll tell you what, you're going to go a lot higher than here.
Exactly.
So
shooting for Sherman
it makes a lot of sense to me. So you're kicking the doors off.
I'm trying to.
And you're doing great. And so
thank you.
Yeah. Give me that.
Appreciate that.
But I now want to talk a bit about what we were talking about that night about the going in and talking to kids. Talking to kids who were like you were and were like, there's no book about me, there's no book about an experience that I can relate to. So you go in and you talk to these kids, and that's what they're like. They're thinking those same thoughts, right? Sure. And so what do you say to them? What do you tell them?
That I see you. Kids in juvie don't. It's interesting because there are kids who are locked in juvenile detention centers that the rest of us who are on the outside never even have to think about. And that's a reality. That's something that we should be thinking about. But the truth is that we literally don't. We never have to. And that's devastating. It's a travesty. And so when I see them, what I tell them is that, first and foremost, I know you're here. I know you're here. I've come to let you know that I see you, that I know you. I've come to tell you that I'm not afraid of you, right? Because that's not a compliment, right? People always come in and it's like, oh, being afraid of a person is an insult. Being afraid of a person is not respect, right? And a lot of these young people, they know that people are scared of them and they don't feel good about it. Right? And they know that people don't ever ask questions like, why are you so upset? Why are you doing the things that you're doing? Why have you done what you've done? Where are you coming from? Who are your parents? What's your neighborhood? Right? What's going on in your community? Instead it's like, hey, you're in there because you belong in there. And it's like, no, these aren't animals. right? And so my job literally has nothing to do with the books as much as it has to do with them seeing that someone who looks like them has done something else with his life, and that someone who looks like them and comes from similar situations can see them for who they are. I tell them all the time, I talk to 20, 30, 40 at a time. It's like, look, I sit here and all I see are children. You don't scare me, you don't you all are my little brothers. And that's a good thing. It's all, to me, it's all love. And I think those moments are always, they're always so inspiring for me. I mean, they're heartbreaking, but they're always so inspiring. I think, and when you listen to what they have to say, you know, young man says, Mr. Reynolds, man, I know everybody always tells us that we have to change, but every decision that I've ever made in my life, I thought was the right decision.
Well, sure. I mean, you know,
Right?
most of the time,
Sure.
you're not like, this is a really terrible decision I'm about to make.
No,
You know what I mean?
they're making the moves they think are the right moves.
It makes sense at the time.
Of course, and sometimes it's about survival. I mean, I was at an alternative school in Southeast DC maybe 2 weeks ago, and a young man says, look, my mother died when I was 12 years old, left me with my little sister. I did what I had to do.
Right.
What do you tell him? Right? What do you say to him? You know, Mr. Jason, I got this ankle bracelet on, and every time I walk the streets, the cops say they can stop and shake me down because this ankle bracelet gives them the right to, which is not true, by the way. And I said, well, what do they do when they find me? They go in my book bag and they pull out my notebook and they say, this way. I say, what are these words in your notebook? And I tell them, these are my raps. Man, they rip my raps out of my notebook, rip the pages out of my notebook. Right? And so, and I'm sitting here, and all he wants to do is make sure that somebody else bears witness to his story.
Yeah.
That's all. I can't do anything for him in that moment. But he just wants me to know that that story is his and that it's true. And that somebody outside of the space can hear it and can take that back into the work. That's it. And that's how this works. I also want you all to know that teenagers in juvie read ferociously because there's nothing else to do. And not only do they read ferociously, the stereotype and the misconception is that all they want to read is When I Was the Greatest, or all they want to read is Monster by Walter D. Myers. And the truth is, the most, Code Booth, right? But the most read books in juvenile detention centers are romance novels, because they're 15, they're 16, and if they were on the street, they'd be experimenting with relationships and dating and sexuality and all the things that young people are dealing with as you enter into your adolescence and working out all your hormones and all your feelings and a girlfriend or a boyfriend or all these things. And so they are sort of experiencing that through the books. And all the books, you know, there's sort of a trope in the sort of these kinds of books where it's like, oh, the good girl somehow sees the bad guy as not so bad. And she sees that she can,
That's
right?
like a whole,
and
like,
it's like a whole thing, right? And so they really invest in these books and they read them over and over.
They want
again.
that girl
because
to
they
recognize the good guy with them.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So now you know. Send all your romance novels to your local juvies.
Yeah. So going in there and talking to these kids, obviously I think that does a great thing for them. But I'm also curious, like, how does it feed your writing? Like, you know, because then it comes back, right?
Sure.
And so have you seen it inform your writing in what way?
Oh, I think it's interesting. I think you can get a little further into the complications of a young person when they are incarcerated. I think something about being locked away and being cut off from a certain thing, I think it exacerbates other parts of the teenage life and teenage-ness and adolescence because there's no outlet. Right, and so when you're and they're contained, they're confined. So it's almost as though you're doing a case study, right? Because they're all in one space and they're interacting, right?
It's a little laboratory,
right? It's a strange, which is strange in and of itself, right? But like it is almost like a little laboratory. You walk in and you get to see them interact with one another. Granted, they're separate. The genders and sexes are separate, right? So you have all boys, you have all girls. But I think even in that, you get to see how boys interact with boys differently. And you get to see how boys interact with boys that they have to rely on. You got in the juvie. This is it. This is your family, right? And you get to see them, you know, and you get to see them in a structured environment. And so the moment that the structure is broken, they get to like cut loose, and you get to watch their mannerisms. You get to see how a tough kid becomes a mouse like this. right? It's like, oh, you walk down the hall, you have to be quiet, one hand behind your back, one in the front, or both hands behind your back. You walk into the room, and the minute they close the door in the classroom, then you can kind of like be at ease, right? And so you see these kids who walk down the hall, down the corridor, all puffed up, because if any other juvie kids are out in the hall, you gotta make sure they know you ain't the one to be messed with, right? Or and then you get into the classroom, and it's like, well, you don't even belong here. What are you doing here, right? And you see them shrink up and become who they are, which are children. You're not a prisoner, right? You are in prison, but you're not a prisoner. You're a teenager. And I think that's sort of the thing that you see, and I can take that and use that in certain situations where it's like, if you're Rashad and All-American Boys, you're not a victim. You've been victimized, right? Or because you're still a teenager who's been victimized. Or if you're Maddie Miller, you're not, a bastard, or you're not a child who lost his, you're not like a depressive. It's like, no, you're a teenager who lost his mom, right? Taking away this sort of the weight of labels and always seeing them as teenagers who have things going on, right? Which is what we all are, human beings with issues and human beings with life things happening. But I think with teenagers, we tend to sort of drape them, we paint them holy, right? It's like, oh, those Baltimore kids, thugs. It's like, oh, right? It's like, no. Kids, right? Who no one's stopped to ask, what's the matter? What's wrong? Why are you upset? No, they're just rioting because they're followers. Even those, why do you feel so inadequate?
Why do you feel like you need to follow?
Why do you? No one's asking the questions though, right? We're just like, just throw the thug sheet on them and push them to the side. They're thugs. They're never gonna change. It's like, God, I'm glad no one felt that way about me, even though I'm sure a lot of people did.
But you didn't internalize that.
No, man, I'm too much of a chip on my shoulder to care about.
There we go. Get me with the
it's like
negative arrogance,
you need that, right? And in those situations, people. I had tattoos when I was 15 years old. And this is back when nobody had tattoos at that age. Covering tattoos at 15 years old. They were teachers. What are you going to do? You're never going to get a job. I know I ain't get no job. That's the point. Right? That was me. I was that. I was sort of like big. I had a big chip on my shoulder because of my environment, because of my family, because of my mother and father, and what happened with them, because of my older brother and what happened with him. Walking around like, man, y'all can't. I might not be the best, but you can't stop me. I might not be great, but I'm gonna do something, and y'all ain't gonna be able to do nothing with it, right? That was sort of my thing, and I still feel that way in certain, as insecure and as sort of, as much as I struggle with that part of it, like, oh, am I a good enough writer? I also know, I tell you what, I don't know if I'm good enough, but I know ain't nobody gonna write, no one's gonna outwork me.
Right. Because you can control that.
Yeah.
There's all these doubts about, like, am I talented enough? And people seem very concerned about this idea, particularly I think when you first start writing. This like, am I good enough? People are constantly looking for some sort of affirmation, of like confirmation from outside. And even if you get it, like even if you win an award, like what more do you need for like affirmation? Yes, you're good enough to win an award, so that means something, But it doesn't, because the external is never going to be satisfying.
It's not. Will Smith has this famous quote. Will Smith said, he said, I'm the guy you put on a treadmill next to another guy. We're both on the treadmill. And he's like, and the thing is that the person who wins is the person who can last the longest on the treadmill. He said, so I'm the guy who dies on the treadmill. And that's how I feel. It's like, yeah, okay, you might be better, but there ain't a person on earth who's gonna work harder than me at this. And that's how every day I wake up, that's how I feel. I'm 2,000 jumpers in the gym every day. Jordan style.
So I've been terrible. I'm sorry, guys. Normally I open it up to questions a lot sooner than this, but like I can't help it, man. Got a lot of interesting things to say. So I'm going to open it up now. Who has questions for Jason about this or anything about writing?
Just your luck. No one will have any questions.
Then I've got plenty more. So if they don't want anyone, anybody you're feeling shy, yeah, what's up? Thank you.
Can you talk about Needles from when I was the greatest of that character? I love him. I love the book.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Needles. So Needles, for those who don't know, Needles is a character from the novel When I Was the Greatest. He has Tourette syndrome, and he uses knitting as his coping mechanism to deal with his mental illness. I used to be a social worker. So I'm one of these guys who had like all the odd jobs in the world, right? Like I only had like I had like a rule that I would only work a job for 1 year, and then I had to go to somewhere else. And so from 20 years old to like 26, it was just like in and out. And I worked for NPR and StoryCorps when they were a brand new company, brand new conglomerate with NPR. And I worked as a middle school teacher, and I was a high school teacher, and then I worked as a caseworker. And when I was a caseworker, I had 27 clients on my caseload, ranging from paranoid schizophrenics, ex-cons, rapists, child molesters, bipolar, manics, Tourette syndrome. And working in the mental health community was incredible for me. It made me terribly sick. Psychosomatic trauma, like internalizing everything, right? Incredibly, that is a very real thing, It gave me terrible anxiety. But it also gave me an incredible amount of empathy because my job was to humanize people who sometimes are demonized for the terrible things that they've done or for biological things that are out of their control, right? No one knows what causes Tourette syndrome or what causes schizophrenia for that matter. We could wake up tomorrow and be schizophrenic and there is no symptom, there is no cause, no one knows, right? And so that put me in a situation where I had to hear their stories and I had to see them for who they are and I had to sort of work around them and work with them and get them housing and benefits and things like that. And that's where sort of Neil's and that kind of character comes from. Empathizing and humanizing people that are laughed at or teased or misunderstood, because they're usually the greatest people. They're usually the best, right? Because they typically possess a certain amount of empathy because they know what it feels like to be ousted. And so just to see, and that was sort of that whole character. Thank you.
Other question? Yes.
I just survived. Did you spend some time in jail?
Did I spend some time in jail? I feel like it. No. No.
Technically, it's maybe.
My question is, it's an age-old question. Do prison bars make a prison?
No. Absolutely not. And that's.
I like your attitude.
And absolutely.
I like your attitude.
Prison bars do not a prison make. That is for sure.
The prison is weird.
It's always here. The prison is always here. And I appreciate you bringing this up because that's what you also see in Juvies.
I'm going to buy one of your books.
I appreciate that. That's what you also.
You said that.
That's true, man.
I said, I'm going to buy your book.
Man, I appreciate it. I mean, that's another thing about juvenile detention centers is that what you think you see in there is not what you see. What you think it's like everybody's moping around, and it's not what it is because these kids have also found freedom in other ways because they've had to. Right? And so you see them sort of doing other things. That's why they read so many books. Right? That's their escape. That's their way of existing on the outside of the bars. Or you see the camaraderie that they build with one another, right? And I think all of those, they're not happy that they're in prison, but they recognize that since this is what it has to be for the moment, then I need to do it. Human instinct kicks in. It's like I have to find my wings, right? And I have to figure out how to get those wings to come out, even though everything around me is trying to tamp those wings down. And I think you see resilience like you've never seen before when you see 15-year-olds behind bars.
And they take advantage of the opportunity to be in prison, to meet other people.
They do everything they can.
Connect with other people.
To connect with other
people.
people.
They learn from those people.
If you all should volunteer because you think it's going to be frightening. The truth is they're going to be so happy to see you because they're happy to see anyone outside of that prison.
Yeah.
They're going to just be happy to see someone else who cares enough to pop in and say, hey, we just stopped in and say hello, see how you guys are doing. It's amazing. Any other questions?
There was one all the way in the back. Yeah.
You could work with anyone as an author, what would you like to
If I could work with anybody as an author, do they have to be an author? They have to be an author.
Do they have to be alive?
Do they have to be alive? They don't have to be alive.
So you could say like Shakespeare.
I would probably work. Gosh, man.
Shakespeare wrote plays.
Shakespeare wrote plays, but I wouldn't do Shakespeare.
What would you do?
Though I do love Shakespeare. So there's a guy who just died. His name was. There are two people that I work with. Sorry, I'm going to cheat a little bit. There are two people. So there are two people. John A. Williams and Dumas. Not the Dumas who wrote The Musketeers.
Okay.
What's his name? Charles Dumas?
I don't.
Or Henry Dumas? Or something else Dumas?
Alexander.
Alexander Dumas. So then I'm talking about Charles Dumas or Henry Dumas.
The one who's not that, right.
And so, and the reason, and so, all right, so
What did
Dumas,
that guy do?
he wrote like Goodbye Sweetwater, he wrote a bunch of stuff, he was a short story and he was a poet, and then John A. Williams, and John A. Williams was like this incredible, and both of them were a part of the Black Arts Movement. And this is why I'm bringing them up. They both were a part of the Black Arts Movement, but Dumas died when he was 19 years old. He was killed by a police officer for jumping a turnstile. But he had written all this work before. I mean, he had written all this stuff. And he's an incredible writer that was introduced to me in a conversation that I had when I was 19 with Amir Baraka. And he was like, look, kid, you need to read this. This is a kid I knew when he was your age. He was writing this all under the table, and no one ever got a chance to meet him and to see his work, but they published it posthumously. And then John A. Williams wrote a book. He wrote a ton of books. The Angry Ones, Sons of Darkness, Sons of Light, The Man Who Cried I Am. I mean, he was just prolific and brilliant, and I've yet to find a writer who can write as well as he could, and no one knows who he is. No one ever knew who he was, and he was a dynamic writer, and he was worth every accolade. But he was also sort of like, he was a rebel rouser, and people kind of, so they shut him down. But he was, those two, I think I would probably, so many people. I mean, I work with Maya Angelou. I mean, Maya Angelou would give me a couple. I mean,
Now you're picking three.
I know. It's such a hard question, right?
Well, I know, but.
All right, I'm leaving it. Those two.
Oh, okay.
Those are my guys. I would work with. That's it. You know what? Tough question, man. Thank you. That's a good question. But I'm gonna leave it at those two.
All right, other questions? Let's try over here real quick, and then anyone over here? No. Yes.
I have a quick one. Some of us were at an SCBWI conference a couple weeks ago, and your editor was one of the presenters, and she talked a lot about you, and also showed us manuscript pages, but from far away, so we couldn't read them. But they were covered over in green ink because she uses green to edit you.
Always.
And I think the one she showed us was like a third draft, and it was just covered. So I want to know, do you have an aversion or a love for green ink now?
A little bit of both. The green ink, it makes me really, really angry, but it also makes me feel really, really warm. Caitlin is, she's very special to me, and we have a really, really tight relationship as friends and as an editor, writer. And I know that everything that she does with my work is for the best, and she's never let me down, and she's never taken it easy on me, which I really appreciate. She doesn't buy into it. The award is award, right? She's like, there's work to do, yeah, and what you're producing right now isn't good enough yet. I've written the books. I'm sure she showed you. I've written 5 times. I'm editing it again right now. It comes out in May. I have to get it done by December 1st, and I still feel like it's going to be more green ink, because that's how it goes sometimes. But that's cool. I'm glad she doesn't use red ink though.
That would be bleeding. Yes.
I'd like to know, thinking back through all the books you've written, I'd like to know if you could share with us, what is the writing process like? How does the idea for the book come to you, and how do you come up with the characters? How do you know what characters are needed in the book, or how does it come to you?
It's all pretty. I wish I had some kind of formula, but it's all pretty organic. I'm a character guy, right? I love characters, right? It's the reason that I go to. I'm a movie guy. I go to movies every 2 or 3 times a week, right? I'm in the movie theater trying to just because I'm studying character, and you can see it differently when you can see the person, right? So I go to and I watch movies and see how they're creating characters and what are all the idiosyncrasies and the tics, because I think for the character, the devil's in the details, right? Human beings are only awesome when you get to know all the weird stuff and all the interesting little, things about them, and so I always start with characters, and I always start with sort of like a basic plot, like a basic premise, right? So in Boy in the Black Suit, for instance, it's like, all right, I'm gonna have this character named named Matt, and who's gonna lose his mom. That was how it started. This kid's gonna lose his mom, and he's gonna have to deal with that. But that's not a good enough story. It's like, all right, well then, who is this character? Who is his mom? Right? And they all have to be whole. Even if you all don't see the whole character, I have to make the whole character. So like the mom's gotta be like, what's her background? Okay, mom is from South Carolina, mom loves to cook, mom used to be an actress, but she never quite got in any movies, did small parts. She's a master of accents, she's really, really funny, she's really, really clever, she's really, really theatrical, because that's her background. But she's a loving mom, she's got a great marriage because the marriage is fun, because she's a loving mom and because she's super theatrical and it's all fun and games.
Now, did you come up with this before you begin writing, or does this happen as you're writing?
Most of it happens before.
Okay.
I really kind of like, just the main characters.
You just kind of brainstorm it all out beforehand.
Just the main characters, and then I just get going. I don't do the outlining thing. I'm not organized enough to do so. I just kind of jump in, and then whenever I hit a wall, for me, a wall means that either your characters aren't developed enough, or you need a new character to enter the story. And that's sort of my sort of barometer. It's like, all right, I'm hitting this wall. I don't know where to go now, which means either I need to give my characters some new, interesting idiosyncrasies to open the story up a bit, or I need to introduce a new character to bust it wide open, right? And that's, so like when I was the greatest, Jazz, the character Jazz, the little sister, the whole like the whole scrapbooking thing was not a part of her original character. But adding that into the story basically gave me 15 pages. It opened the whole story up, and I was able to connect certain dots and form connections and relationships that I couldn't without her having something. But she had nothing at first. She was just a cool little sister that was naming everybody in the street. But then she became the cool little sister who sort of envisioned her family a certain way. The cool little sister who was super warm and endearing and charming, and that sort of gave her other things to do, which then gave everybody else other things to do around her, right? And that's sort of how it's puzzle pieces, and that's usually the process. And then I just let the characters, if you write them well enough, they'll tell you what the story's going to be.
It's true.
They'll inform they'll do all the work for you, if you trust them.
That's good. I think we're about out of time here.
Oh, sorry guys, that was awesome.
No, so one more page has Jason's books over here, my books as well. And one thing I've added new, because people are constantly being like, I don't know when the next Shut Up and Write is, I don't know who's going to be talking, get your act together, Scavron. And so I'm attempting to get my act together somewhat. And so there's a sign-up list if you want to put your name and email on there, and then just like a little check boxes if you just want to know stuff, because I'm the last person who will ever want to send you email you don't want to get. So there's a checkbox for if you just want to know about Shut Up and Write, and then another checkbox if you're also curious about like when my next books are coming, and that kind of stuff. As an added incentive, the other person who organizes all of this that unfortunately could not be here tonight because she's sick, is Jessica Spotswood, another local author. And she and I have been talking a lot lately that we want to start drilling down into more specific nuts and bolts writing kind of stuff, because it seems to me, from the feedback I get from folks, is that would be very interesting to you, and to like really start saying like how to write a dynamic, gripping first chapter, like those kind of things, to really kind of drill down. And if you sign up for the mailing list, you can I will be asking members of the mailing list to submit ideas for topics. So that's one incentive to actually sign up for the mailing list. All right, and I'm Jason. Hopefully if people want to buy your books, you'll sign.
Of course.
And stuff like that. For sure. Cool. All right, well, thanks for coming. The next one will be in January. I don't know who it's going to be yet. But if you sign up for the mailing list, I'll totally tell you as soon as we have it confirmed. I am hoping that I will have an exciting one to announce, but yeah.